Well, a very, very happy new year to you from both of us here at the Northern Spin podcast. I'm Michael Taylor, and I'm wishing you all a very happy and healthy 2023 as we return for the 6th episode of season 2 of the Northern Spin podcast. The new year honours ignored me again. I wouldn't accept one if they offered, frankly. But my name is still Michael Taylor, and I'm still the editor of Business Desk in the Northwest. As always, I'm joined by the banter king of Kent himself, the cheeky chappy from Chorley, Chris Maguire.
I would accept an honour, Michael, if I was offered, but I've not been offered.
And what would your title be?
Well, probably that actually. The cheeky chappy of Kent would sort of suffice for me, or the Lord of cheeky chappiness from Chorley. One of those
but
two.
You know, you don't get made a lord in those honours lists. That's OBEs and MBEs.
Sirs. Well, I'll start with an OBE and then move up to an MBE.
Right. Okay.
But look, at least you've not called me a spare. Now that's a book I'm not going to be reading.
No, me neither. Moving swiftly on.
Okay. Now, on a serious note, I am still the executive editor of Business Cloud, which might surprise people. I've got a New Year's request, and incidentally, I don't like wishing people a Happy New Year.
No, I know you don't.
Late.
Are you the Scrooge of? Maybe that's the other name.
Yeah, you wish Happy New Year like 3 days after New Year. And
no, I do it up until about the 28th of February. It's the first time you've seen someone. So all these guys here in the studio who work with us from What Media, fantastic team. Sam sat with us producing today's podcast. First thing I see him, big handshake, Happy New Year.
Yeah, but if you see
I've not
Sam,
seen him.
If you see Sam for the first time in August, do you still wish him Happy New Year? That's where you've got to draw the line.
No, I don't, but I work with him regularly and we're seeing him now. So I think
but I have got
you're in a minority here.
I have got a New Year's wish.
Stop
I have
digging.
got a New Year's wish, and it's that our ever-expanding group of listeners, which is great actually, they press the subscribe button. So about half the people who listen to our podcast are subscribers. This is an issue that faces lots of podcasts, including my mate Steve Bartlett. He reckons 75% of their listeners don't subscribe. They just listen at whim. When they want to. So what I wish actually is that our people, our listeners, press the subscribe button. That makes a big difference to us, and it makes a big difference as well commercially. So that's my wish.
Okay, so before we get stuck into the show, we've got a couple of important thank yous to give. We've already bigged up our friends at What Media, but there's no problem in doing that again. They really turn our political ramblings on the Northern Spin podcast into this weekly delight that drops into people's boxes, either on YouTube, and some people even watch us on video. Did you know that?
I know,
Amazing.
yeah.
Tell me to stop fidgeting. Sorry. So thank you, What Media. Oscar Technology as well.
Yeah. Actually, just mention Ellis Street.
Ellis from the team has been made producer.
At the age of 24.
I know. What a talent.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to thank, as well as What Media, I'd like to thank Oscar Technology. They are our sponsors. They're not our only sponsors as well. Other slots are available. Founded in 2008, they're a leading name in the world of tech and digital recruitment. After a record-breaking year in 2022, Oscar is planning several office openings around the world. I don't know if that extends as far as Chorley, so we keep a close eye on that, and we thank them very much for being our sponsor.
And not a tough amongst them. We'll come on to that later.
Yeah.
So thank you, Oscar Technology. We had a big week last year where Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer laid out their stalls for the year ahead. Let's talk about something very close to your heart then, Tories. It's the chat, Chris. It's the Tories. Chaps. The chaps are back. Good old chaps from the Tory party. Safe pair of hands.
I can see what your New Year's resolution is trying to be, which is funny, and you're failing already.
What?
Or trying to be funny with that rubbish impression of a toffee-nosed Tory. Now, it is a subject close to my heart, as is the Labour Party, because what I want is what's best for Britain. And there was a lot of political posturing last week. Rishi Sunak's policy seems to be that he and his ministers aren't going to fill the airwaves with countless appearances unless they've got something really important to say, or it's a flagship event. So
fell over on that one already.
So soon it was interviewed by Laura Kuenssberg on Sunday, pre-recorded interview. Now, the fact that he's not done many interviews has led to accusations that he's gone missing, especially in relation to the ongoing problems with the NHS, which we'll talk about, and the continuing industrial action. The interesting thing is that if the next general election was decided by a popularity contest between Sunak and Keir Starmer, there's a chance he could win, but unfortunately his own personal popularity isn't matched by that of his party. It's no coincidence that he tried to steal the agenda by giving his speech before Starmer's. Starmer himself said that he'd booked the venue in East London before the Conservatives. It was just down the road. With the general election likely to be next year, it's hard to believe that, next year in 2024, I went through Sunak's 5 pledges because he's focusing on the biggies rather than sweating the small stuff. So his pledges were half inflation, this year. Now, most economists think inflation's already peaked, so it's fairly safe. It's gonna drop probably to half what it is at the moment. So as pledges go, that's a safe bet. Grow the economy, a little bit vague. Get our national.
What does that even mean?
Exactly. Get our national debt falling. Now, after Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's terrible 49 days in office, it seems to change. Some people say 44, other people say 49. I think this is a massive attempt by Rishi Sunak to restore the Conservatives' reputation for economic prudence. NHS waiting list to fall. Once again, a fairly vague promise. He's not set a timescale for NHS waiting list to fall. He's said his fifth pledge is to pass a new law to stop the boats arriving. Now, passing laws is not the same as actually tackling the problem of small boats.
I really, really don't like it when politicians, even backbench politicians who do these petitions and private members' bills to introduce laws to supposedly stop things they don't like, when there is already enough law to do it. But what there isn't is the government resources to be able to tackle the problem.
Well, the other tactic that politicians use is when they're trying to get out of a jam, they say we've launched an inquiry and we can't comment until the inquiry.
Yeah, they do, don't they? That's really annoying.
So when they say we're going to pass a bill, that's not the same as passing a bill to tackle a problem. I thought it was a competent performance by Sunak. I thought the BBC's political editor probably summed it up best, Chris Mason, when he said, "Is that it?" Now, you're not going to get any great performances by Sunak. In fact, I don't think you're going to get any great performances by Starmer in terms of from a PR perspective. But the newspaper headlines were reasonably positive. Were you?
Well, of course, the newspaper headlines are really positive because that's the way the media in this country works. They're what I would call client journalists who work, and client newspapers who work. The Daily Mail, The Sun, The Times, The Telegraph, pretty much cheerlead anything the Tories say. It was absolutely embarrassing during Boris Johnson's last few days, the way the Daily Express in particular rallied around Boris Johnson and papered over all his quite obvious failings, even the ones he'd admit to himself. They absolutely give them an easy ride. I've now had the opportunity to watch Rishi Sunak or clips of him on the Laura Kuenssberg show. I thought it was a weak performance. I think he was quite clearly repeating those same 5 pledges and those sound bites over and over again instead of answering the actual questions that she put to him. I thought most of her questions were fairly weak. He failed to answer the very simple question about his own experiences of using private healthcare, which has become the issue that everybody's picked up on.
Should he have said that he uses private doctors? Because
if he does,
Margaret
yes.
Thatcher did. Margaret Thatcher, she said, yes, I do, because I want to book an appointment that suits me and allows me to go about my job. Okay, and actually, she didn't get a rough ride on that, but we didn't have social media in them days. So if Rishi Sunak had said, yes, I use a private doctor, would that problem have gone away? No, it wouldn't have done.
I think the problem that has not gone away is the fact that I think everybody knows by his obfuscating that clearly he does use private healthcare, and that puts him in the minority in the population. And the NHS is facing this really acute crisis that anybody who's experienced it at all recently, and we have again over the Christmas break, I think it plays to the point that he's out of touch with the lives of normal people. I think that's what's at stake here. And that's why, obviously, opposition politicians and people who don't like him will be pushing that line on social media, because basically he's not like one of us. He's tough.
You think rather than being measured against these 5 pledges, he should be measured against the manifesto pledges?
Yes, I do. So you contrast the 5 pledges that he's made this week, and you contrast them with the Tory manifesto that he and all those other Tories were elected on to give them an 80-seat majority as recently as 2019. Where's the extra funding for the NHS? They promised 50,000 more nurses and 50 million more GP surgery appointments a year. Nonsense. It's absolutely in tatters. 20,000 more police and tougher sentencing for criminals. Again, it's just rhetoric. The Australian-style points-based system to control immigration. This country is already really difficult to get into, and both Suella Braverman and Priti Patel before her had not in any way gripped the immigration system in this country. They promised more investment into schools, science, apprenticeships, infrastructure, whilst controlling debt. Again, absolute nonsense. Though, to be fair, as I am a fair person, we have had a global pandemic that they funded. But there's no mention of the other pledges in there as well. Net zero, no raising of taxes. And that other famous word that supposedly helped them secure the red wall, levelling up. Where is it?
No.
Where is it?
Well, I think Rishi Sunak is more committed to levelling up than Liz Truss, which wouldn't be hard. I thought Rishi Sunak this week, I thought he did okay. He's competent. He wants to be taken as a serious politician. He wants people to say, you know what, we can trust the Conservative Party because Rishi Sunak is a safe pair of hands.
No, he's a good chap.
Yeah, I thought he played...
As Peter Hennessy, the famous historian, says, he has his theory, the good chap theory, that people like you, you like these safe Tory, as you say, you call it safe pair of hands. You mean capable toffs.
No, he played the interview with a fairly straight bat. I think what he's in danger of doing is what Liz Truss did in the last few days of her disastrous 49 days, which is just relying on about 3 lines, which is growth, and the anti-growth coalition. I mean, it's interesting that Sunak's not going on the offensive. He's not. He just wants to be seen as a serious politician. He's getting his message out there, and he will be able to demonstrate that inflation has dropped by 4% because of the measures that we're taking, and things will be better under the next Conservative government. That's what he tries to get across. You're not going to see loads and loads of headlines from his cabinet. You're not. You're just going to see selective ones as well.
That's because I don't think he's got a genuine vision for what kind of country that he wants to lead. To be fair, I thought Truss did, though it was just absolutely bonkers. She was talking about a country that doesn't exist. Now, I don't know. I didn't watch all of the interview. I'll be fully candid about that. But prior to the interview with Laura Kuenssberg, he came out with this nonsense idea about making every child in this country study maths up until the age of 18, and then had another statement about anti-strike laws. For me, they were pure dead cat tactics. It's just change the subject, say something controversial, and grab the headlines. So wanting to ban strikes and having a minimum level of public service. I mean, what about the responsibility of the ambulance service to actually provide someone to get an ambulance? We had to call an ambulance for an old lady that we look after, and we were told it would be 9 hours. Now, where is that the union's fault that they should somehow guarantee that to be? Because it wasn't on a strike day.
Can I just pick you up on something you said earlier? Because wasn't it Boris Johnson who wrote about the dead cat tactic?
No, it was Linton Crosby.
Yeah,
and it was deployed during the 2015 general election when people were talking about one thing, and Michael Fallon, who was a Tory minister at the time under David Cameron, went onto a programme and said, we can't trust Ed Miliband because he knifed his own brother in the back. It was a ridiculous thing to say. But but what it did is it had the net effect of everybody suddenly talking about something else other than what they should be talking about, which is cost of living crisis, the NHS on its knees, and the country, basically, infrastructure not working at the moment.
You mentioned New Year at the start, excessively, I think. I want to live my life a certain way. I don't want to be nasty. I don't want to say things just to attract clicks. I don't. That's not me. But one of the things that I didn't like last week, and you mentioned the Sunak's attempt at trying to get people to take maths until they're 18, which incidentally I didn't agree with. I didn't agree with the idea. But Simon Pegg, the actor, who took to social media to use a load of expletives and say it was this, it was that, it was outrageous, etc., etc. And then the last time I checked, it had 4.6 million views.
Wow.
That is the worst thing. I hate stuff like that. It's just, for me, it's just it's everything that's wrong with the world. I think it's a race to the bottom. People say stuff, they put expletives in there. It beats the algorithm. They get a young audience sharing it because they say, I agree with that. I didn't want to do foreign languages at school, but I was made to until my 3rd year, until they realised that I didn't actually know any foreign words. So they said I didn't have to take foreign languages. I'm not going to go on social media and rant, am I? Why does Simon Pegg do it for? And we should just cut that stuff down.
I think your claim that is everything that is wrong with the world is working pretty hard there. I think Simon Pegg is doing nothing more than reflecting the real raw anger that's out there, that Rishi Sunak is not addressing the issues that are really important to people. The fact that he swore, you don't like it because it makes him less of a good chap.
What's this obsession with the word chap, Michael? Have you ever heard me use the word chap? Do I look posh to you? Do I sound posh to you? I'm not posh.
Yeah, no, but you like the poshos, don't you?
I don't like the poshos.
You like the good old Tory chaps.
Your thing is
doing the right thing.
Thing is, what you're trying to do is you're trying to make yourself out to be a mank. That's what you're trying to do. Yeah, I'm down with I'm Michael Taylor. I'm a proper labourist, etc., etc. What you're trying to do, you're trying to make yourself. You live in a big house in Marple. Let's put the facts on the table. How many bedrooms have you got?
4.
4, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, so you're making out that you're living.
It's because I've got a big family.
So
What's the point?
Your kids don't live with you anymore. And now, that's not personal. You've got a big family.
Yeah, we couldn't sell our
house.
house. We couldn't sell our house because the housing market's collapsed.
Yeah.
We were trying to downsize because we think it's amoral that people should be living in big houses where they're not utilising all the rooms.
That makes you a chap. As far as I'm concerned. You're living in a big house.
It does not make me.
You're living in a big house, which you don't need.
It does not make me an Eton attending good old chap who I'll stand up in front of an audience of business people and say, Labour are too socialist, we're going to vote Conservative. Get the good chaps back in.
Okay, all right, chap. Chappie Taylor, that's your new nickname.
Look at you, getting personal as well. There's absolutely no need for that. Anyway, I've got absolutely no problem with Simon Pegg doing what he did. I'm not saying he wanted there to be 4.6 million people viewing it, but I think the fact that so many people did reflected the real anger that's out there at the moment. And I'm rather that people are liking his content than that idiot, Andrew Tate, banged up in Romania, and the effect that he has on young minds.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned Andrew Tate because Jess Phillips, who is the Shadow Minister for Domestic Violence and Safeguarding, didn't know who Andrew Tate was. Now, surely, bearing in mind, and I'm not an apologist for Andrew Tate, but he's sending out this misogynistic content which is beating the algorithms and is dropping into people's timelines, young impressionable kids' timelines, and some of the things he's saying is absolutely outrageous, and he's doing it he's a shock jock.
Yeah.
You know, surely Jess Phillips, as Labour's Shadow Minister for Domestic Violence and Safeguarding, needs to know who he is. Surely.
I don't know. Maybe she didn't want to dignify him by acknowledging his existence. I remember a really brilliant moment at a Labour-ish event I went to in about 2013 where Dave Haslam was interviewing David Miliband
of Hacienda fame
on stage. He's actually more famous for DJing at the Boardwalk, but of course you wouldn't know that, and you just accused me of trying to get down with Demanx. Okay. But anyway, moving on. And Dave had this really long question for David Miliband about something that Owen Jones had said. And David Miliband's kind of brow furrowed, his eyes narrowed. He turned around, he went, "Who's Owen Jones?" And I thought that was absolutely masterful.
So you mentioned you went to a Labourist event. I'm surprised you can remember which event it was because you've been to so many. But we're going to move on and talk Channel 4 because what we don't want to make this into is a personal slagging match between me and you, the chap from Marple. What do you think of the government's decision not to sell Channel 4?
Well, I used to write about the television business in the 1990s when I was a struggling journalist, getting by living off pot noodles in my bedsit in London, trying to make my way in the world because I'm not from a posh background. But back then I did. I gathered together all my courage and confidence and was granted an interview in the boardroom of Channel 4 with the red-braced, cigar-chomping Michael Grade, the chief executive of Channel 4 at the time. And I remember asking him then, what was his tactics for fighting the inevitable campaign that there would be to privatise the channel? And that was in the 1990s, in the dying days of the Conservative government. So about 92, 94-ish about. Anyway, what people don't appreciate is the model for Channel 4 is a publisher broadcaster. So apart from Right to Reply, do you know how many hours of television they've produced in their entire history?
Not
many. No. Hardly any. All their shows are made by independent production companies, independent producers. Their news is produced by ITN. They import lots of programs from overseas that they make into hits through their own marketing and their own very careful targeting of their demographic. And some of these independent producers that started making shows for Channel 4 back in the 1980s when they started have grown to be significant media companies. So in many ways, it's a very, very Tory success story, supporting entrepreneurship and private enterprise. Moving to Leeds, which was in theory should allow more access to commissioners of programmes in the north, creating more opportunities for the creative industries. But I noticed one interesting thing in the announcement that Michelle Donnellan made, who's the new Culture Secretary, succeeding Nadine Dorries. She mentioned changing Channel 4's charter to enable them to produce their own content in greater numbers. But Channel 4's never asked for this. So, I mean, I'm absolutely baffled as to why that should suddenly be on the government's agenda. Or maybe she just doesn't understand how that model works. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think about Because incidentally as well, PACT, the organisation that I later went on to work for and produced their magazine, their statement was, any relaxation of Channel 4's publisher broadcaster status will be a blow to the sector, who are already facing increased production and business-related costs.
Okay,
So what do you think? What do you think of
I think it's interesting.
Channel 4?
I think it's interesting that you cozied on up to Michael Grade all them years ago.
Cozied on up. I was a terrified young journalist sitting in his office, scribbling notes and hoping I didn't make a mistake.
Okay, and no longer a struggling journalist as well. You know, that's refreshing. No longer eating pot noodles in your 4-bedroom mansion. No,
How do you know I don't?
Maybe you do.
I do like a Vesta chow mein as it goes.
Okay,
keep going.
It gets back to the point. It gets back to the point. I think in terms of Channel 4 that. It falls into the category that Channel 4 is not going to win the next general election. So the Conservatives have said, you know what? Why are we talking about privatising and selling off Channel 4? There's no point. There's not huge calls for it. I thought it was a good call by Michelle Donnellan. She's only 38, incidentally. One of my things I'm obsessed by is people's ages. I always check their ages. She's 38. Given that Channel 4 recently moved to Leeds, I think there's a tiny nod towards levelling up. This is what I think the Conservatives are trying to do. They're not coming out and making statements about levelling up, but by their actions, they are trying to say, well, actually, we are aware of the whole need to levelling up. So they've said that they're going to promise to double the number of Channel 4 jobs outside of London. Henry Morrison of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, who seems to be quite prolific on social media.
What age is he?
I don't know, but I'd hazard a guess at about 44. I met him at Chester Racecourses.
Not interested. Move on.
Andy Burnham tweeted their support for the decision.
53, do you reckon?
Andy Burnham, well, he ran the Boston Marathon last year, didn't he? So he's early 50s. If you're listening, Andy, you're welcome on the show. They tweeted their support for the decision, but the fact that Nadine Dorries condemned the move convinces me it was the right decision. But don't you think, this is the problem that
she's a total idiot?
Yeah, I think, well, like I say, I don't want to, cast aspersions on people, but the moment, you can see what's happened, the Conservatives decided that they're going to not go down the route of selling off Channel 4. So Michelle Donnellan has given Nadine a call and said, hey, Nadine, just to let you know, we're not going to go ahead with your policy. And Nadine stakes straight to social media to condemn everything and says, the last 3 years of everything that we achieved under Boris Johnson has just been washed down the... What did they achieve? It is embarrassing.
It's embarrassing. I think Nadine Dorries' motivation for wanting to privatise Channel 4 was pure culture war stuff, just because she'd had a hard time on an interview with Krishnan Gurumurthy, and just because they did a few programmes that the Guardian reading, tofu eating types like, therefore it's right for privatisation. And it's absolute nonsense. Yeah, she hasn't thought it through.
Yeah, no, I agree. But she hasn't.
But it wouldn't even be privatised for the benefit of the general public buying shares in their own corporation, like privatisation promised in the 1980s. They probably just sold it off to a global media company and merged it with Channel 5 or something.
Yeah,
that was the speculation in the industry, apparently.
But anyway, tick in the box. I think it was the right decision. Now, let's talk about something that's even closer to your heart than the Conservatives are to my heart, because they're not really close to my heart. But we know that Labour Party is very, very close. It is in your DNA.
Well, I'm a Labour Party member, full disclosure.
Yeah. So with this...
But I don't work for them anymore. I'm a journalist.
Absolutely. So with this, very defensive though, Michael, very defensive. You don't need to tell me we're friends. You don't need to tell me, but if you feel the need to tell the general public, you can. So
I think it's just important to be honest.
Sir Keir Starmer, with his sleeves rolled up, delivered his first speech for 2023, nicked the Brexit slogan, take back control. What was your take on that and his performance generally?
I think he's building up a steady but solid and unspectacular reputation for safety, maturity and honesty. I think the decision to use the slogan "Take Back Control" is a brave one. It also speaks to the idea that things are happening to people that they have no control over, and that is a motivator for them to vote one way or the other. Dominic Cummings quite rightly identified that and weaponised it to mobilise support for Brexit. And Starmer just has to be really, really careful now that mobilising support for devolution, which is where this policy direction is going in, is done at a level that people think that things being done to them, decisions being taken about their everyday lives, are taken at a level that they can relate to and have some say over, rather than it just being another managerial they making decisions to change their lives. And we've seen that with things like the clean air zone in Greater Manchester, that people in parts of Bury and Salford and Trafford and Stockport on its outer fringes near where I live, that places there thought that it was being done by Andy Burnham and the centre. And I think that's a real, and having things like the plan for jobs and homes to sort of have a long-term plan. Again, people have to have purchase into it in the decisions that are made. What do you think?
I think Starmer is increasingly sounding like a Prime Minister in waiting.
Yeah, okay.
I think the thing I like about Starmer is that Starmer's not trying to pretend something. He's not trying to pretend to be something he's not.
No.
You know, he knows what his limitations are and he knows what his strengths are. He's never going to be box office when it comes to his performance. He does try to crack a joke about the fact that he's not going to tell he's not going to tell Rishi Sunak where he's going on holiday in case Rishi's there as well. I don't think that humour comes across particularly well when he accused Rishi Sunak of being a blancmange prime minister. I think before Christmas at PMQs, that didn't work. That's not his his expertise. He's being very sensible about saying we're not going to make any reckless announcements on spending to stimulate the economy. I think West Streeting for me just goes up in my estimation all the time when he talks about the health service. They're not throwing away things just to try and attract cheap headlines.
Okay.
He spoke about a partnership with private business. That's sensible. And he's not afraid to defend it as well. He speaks a lot about devolution and devolving powers out of Westminster. That plays very well to the red wall seats up here. What I found more telling was the comments earlier in the week. Your mate Peter Mandelson. So when did you speak to Peter last?
Oh, not for ages.
Okay. Well, anyway,
No, actually, last year we were at a Progressive Britain conference. Okay. It was in the summertime. It was a really hot day in London.
So you and your mate Peter, he was doing the rounds, various podcasts last week in support of Starmer that I thought was really quite telling. A lot of people are trying to say, does this feel like 1995 and 1996 when Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and the Labour Party, were coming to the fore? And the general view is no. But it's feeling a bit like that. But also, don't compare Starmer with Blair because they are completely different, Yeah,
I agree. I think there's one trap, though, that Keir Starmer really does need to be very careful about. So party politics is always about holding together coalitions of different competing views within that broad coalition. And he has to be really careful on the Brexit rhetoric. So the Green Party MP, Caroline Lucas, praised Starmer for focusing quite rightly on long-term solutions, not short-term sticking plaster policies. But she was quite critical of him for treating the whole issue of the devastating impact of Brexit as some kind of absurd taboo. Nobody wants to talk about Brexit. Yeah. No, nobody. They daren't. Because there's a guy who writes to the local paper that I write for in Tameside, the Tameside Reporter and Glossop Chronicle papers. And there's a really lively letters page. And there's a guy called Alan O'Day in Stalybridge. And he writes these letters berating the Ramonas. And I can almost hear his voice. And I'm not going to try and impersonate it. But it's this idea that, we won the referendum, suck it up. And I think people are scared of people like that. He's never going to vote Labour anyway. He's going to vote for whatever party Nigel Farage comes up with or some other demi-fascist group that might emerge from the wreckage.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. Brexit is the one thing that he's just not getting drawn in. One thing I don't like about journalists is when they have a big-name guest in, a politician, and they throw some curveball questions at them. And I remember they did it with the what was the name of the MP in Liverpool? He was asked questions about Liverpool's history. The Jewish MP who
Luciana Berger.
That's right. Yeah. And she's spoken very much about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, but I remember she was asked loads of questions about when did Liverpool win the Euro to win Championship and stuff like that. And I thought that was a little bit unfair, but it was one of those that was meant to catch her out. And they do it with a lot of politicians. How much is a loaf of bread? Damn it. I don't like that, but I'm going to throw it to you now.
Oh, no.
I'm going to ask you some questions. And I know, I feel confident.
Loaf of bread's a pound. Milk's about 80p.
What sort of bread do you like?
I'm actually off bread at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
But I do like a nice nutty brown loaf on with a bit of toast.
Okay, all right.
Toasted with a bit of jam.
Okay.
What about you? What do you like?
Well, probably
as
white,
if this is relevant.
Probably white. Listen, I think
answer the question. What kind of bread do you like?
Yeah. Actually, a bit like you. I try not to eat too much bread because it's a bit heavy on the old tum tum. So I tend to eat a lot of wraps. But I think this is the sort of content that's going to get us awards, Michael. Okay, but I'm going to ask you 5 questions because one of my issues about the Labour Party is nobody knows who the shadow cabinet is.
So?
Now you will know because you're a sad labourist who attends every labourist meetings going. But let's just put it to the test. I'm not going to ask Sam the questions, but at the end, I'm going to ask Sam to put a hands out of 5, right? How many of these do you know, Sam? It's not to embarrass you. It's just you're a normal bloke, whereas Michael's a labourist. Okay. Easy one to start. Who is the Shadow Chancellor?
Rachel Reeves.
Okay, start off at 1. Okay, and we've got some musical accompaniment. Ding. Okay, that's 1 out of 1. Who is the Shadow Home Secretary?
Yvette Cooper.
Okay, I'd have got both of those because they're both fairly well known. Okay. Who is the Shadow Defence Secretary?
John Healey.
See, that's pretty sad that you know that. That is pretty sad. Who is the Shadow Education Secretary?
Bridget Phillipson.
Okay. The correct.
Do you want me to tell you what constituencies they represent as well?
No. But actually, I could probably tell you how old they all are. And the last one, who is the Shadow Transport Secretary?
Louise Haigh.
Okay, so you got 5 out of 5, and you probably feel really good about yourself now because that just confirms your labourist tendencies. But let's open it up to the public. Of those 5, how many would you have got? So zero. Okay, and Sam, normal man in the street, wouldn't have known any of those.
I've met the man in the street.
Okay, you're an absolute labourist. So A, you need to get out more. Okay,
I do.
But
I do a political podcast.
Okay,
I do my research.
Absolutely, you do your research. Okay, but at the 2019 general election, you will be aware that the Labour Party had their worst performance since 1935. So the number of Labour politicians was completely decimated. So we're both in agreement that the Labour Party will almost certainly win the next general election. Okay, and if you look at Keir Starmer's pool of talent that he's going to go to create a new cabinet, he has not got a lot to go at. He's not got a lot of household names among those shadow politicians. They're not talking. I can't remember the last time I heard John Healey talk. That's the reason why I think Labour heavyweights like Andy Burnham, I've said it before, I'll say it again, Andy, if you're listening, and David Miliband will go back to Westminster because there isn't enough of a pool of talent in the Labour Party to create a cabinet and all the ministers that they need. Should we be worried?
No, we shouldn't. So the shadow cabinet have absolutely zero power. Why should people hang off their words? Until there's a general election, it's just podcasts like ours that listen to stuff out there so you don't have to. So I don't think it's a massive issue at all. I dare say most members of the general public couldn't name the actual cabinet in all of those roles. Yeah? I mean, I know we could, but I think I asked you earlier who off mic who the health secretary is. I couldn't immediately think who it is. And there's quite a few, like Mark Harper as Transport Secretary, who are relatively unknown. I think Boris Johnson was bringing all sorts of non-entities into his cabinet in his dying days because he couldn't make up the numbers. I don't think it's that important. I do remember an anecdote that a journalist told once called Danny Finkelstein from the Times. And he was telling a story. It says, on the application form, it says, are you interested in politics? This is for a job in political journalism. So can you name the shadow transport minister? And the reply came back, I said I was interested in politics, not obsessed with it.
I think if you asked me to name, Conservative politicians, I could literally name any politician who was a Conservative, and at some point in the last 6 months, they would have been a minister.
Yeah, good chaps, all of them, Chris.
Just like you, Michael. Anyway, it's time for an interval and see if Michael, brings out his halloumi, during the interval. So welcome back to the second part of the Northern Spring podcast. I do need to apologise, actually, because I was trying to think of a posh food at Chaps in Marpley, and I came up with halloumi, and that got 0 points. So then I suggested hummus, and then Sam, who's a man of the people, because he didn't know any of the shadow cabinet, said, I eat hummus, and I eat halloumi. So I don't know what would be a really posh food, but I apologise anyway for just generalisations. Now, Northern Spin, this is a section we're going to talk about regional politics, and we've got a new game that I'm going to play, and you'll love it. It's called On Manoeuvres. But you want to talk about a serious subject first, and a serious man. You want to talk about the High Street and an article by somebody that we both like, Sir John Timpson. What's your thoughts?
So when I worked at Manchester Metropolitan University from 2016 up until 2021, I successfully applied within the university for them to fund a new think tank called Metropolis. We held events, we published books and papers in order to get academics involved in policy conversations. We met many politicians and policy wonks, but the absolute killer initiative was the Chancellor's Fellowship, where we would invite academics to apply for funding to work in a government department or produce some work that could have impact. One of them was to support the Institute for Place Management at the university to look at the future of high streets. Professor Cathy Parker and Dr. Steve Millington did some fantastic work, and one of them was an event where we involved Sir John Timpson, who then went on to work with the government to produce a report.
Worth to say in terms of John Timpson, when people think of Timpson's, where you get your keys cut and you get your clothes cleaned as well, and James Timpson now runs it, his son. Incidentally, John Timpson's son,
Stop
Edward.
Pointing at me, it's really aggressive.
John Timpson's son, Edward, he's an MP, isn't he? Or at least he was.
Well, interestingly, he was the MP for Crewe and Nantwich for a short period, and Labour waged this campaign against him, which I thought was really horrible, actually, where they were all wearing top hats and tails and making out that he was a real toff. And I just thought that was so disrespectful for everything that the Timpson family were really about.
Amazing family.
Because he's not, he's not a top hat.
No, he's not. No, definitely not.
He's a good chap.
Yeah.
But he's not. Anyway,
okay.
And he was a reasonably good children's minister as well, because his family have got all that lived experience of fostering.
So John's written a column, hasn't he?
So he has. He wrote a piece in the Eye newspaper, which was really good, about the high streets. And his basic contention is, yes, there are going to be fewer shops that are on each individual high street. Yes, there's going to be a withdrawal of lots of brands. And I see this myself where I live, in the Stockport suburb of Marple. M&Co has a closing down sale at the moment. When we first moved there in 2006, there were 6 banks. There are now none, unless you count the Vernon Building Society, having a small counter inside an estate agent. And there's a real transformation going on. A lot of those properties are being given over now, not just shops, but over to leisure operators. A couple of pubs have closed, but at the same time, other sort of pop-up microbreweries have started. There's what used to be the RBS Bank is now converted into flats, as has actually the old NatWest Bank. They had 2 on the same strip of land. And I think where Steve Millington and Cathy Parker did the research, which was really interesting, is that town centres where the local council has an intervention and they start putting events on and they bring the local business community to have a partnership or a town team to really animate the space, to create markets every now and again, and maybe to convert buildings with a bit of state support into something very different and compelling and event spaces to bring people in. They've succeeded. And the example that always gets thrown up is Altrincham. And you know a little bit about that as well, don't you?
Yeah. Just in terms of, I think it's quite interesting what you mentioned about Edward Timpson, is that I think we've got to be careful not to criticise people because they come from a family which may have some money or may have earned money. I look at the Timpson family, I judge them from what they do. And such as John Timpson's wife, I listened to a Desert Island Disc, I think it was with Sir John, and he spoke about his wife and how she were foster parents for a long period of time. They are a marvellous family. And what James Timpson does is a phenomenal speaker, what he does with his top-down business and the way they look after their members of staff. That's how I judge people. So I was thinking about this because I know you want to talk about high streets, and obviously I live near Chorley and South Ribble. We go to Chorley, you get free parking for the first few hours. You need to have a ticket. I didn't have a ticket once, got a parking ticket, but I'm not bitter. Leyland, you can also park in free blue spaces. So, parking shouldn't be an issue in Chorley and Leyland. But I spoke to my wife about this and she said, you know what? I walked down Leyland High Street recently and she said there were no empty shops. She said, but what there were loads of you're never more than 4 feet from a barber in Leyland. That's a fact. There's lots of charity shops, nothing wrong with that at all. Vape shops as well, pawn shops. And the problem is that you have to have a special offer. So there's a guy that we both know, Nick Johnson, and you mentioned Altrincham, and he had this view that food markets can revitalise towns and city centres. So I went to Altrincham, I went to the food market, and it was amazing. It was absolutely, buzzing. There were loads of people there. This wasn't just like, in the week before Christmas. This was like, in some period of time when you wouldn't have expected many people as well. So I think for town centres to be successful, they can't just be click and collect places. They've got to have a unique offer. I think food markets work for certain areas. I think, but they have to offer an experience. And I remember back in the day when you were the editor of the Northwest Insider, the first event that I went to that you hosted was in Warrington, and we had our friends from Muse Developments were giving a speech, and they were talking about the plans for Warrington, and they said there has to be a leisure offer to go alongside the retail offer, and actually everybody accepts that now, but back then it wasn't, because we had the out-of-town shopping centres as well. So I think city centres and town centres, to be appealing to the public, have got to have a unique offer, whatever that offer is.
Yeah, they've got to be distinctive. Now, I like Nick a lot. He too featured in many of the projects that the Institute of Place Management discussed that I mentioned earlier. But there's a real danger that everywhere thinks that they can basically do an Altrincham. That's a town centre where people live in £2 million houses 100 yards away from where you can go walk along and buy a burger for 12 quid. Yeah. Now, that's not going to happen, with the greatest respect, in Leyland, Chorley, Marple, Radcliffe or Wigan. And Radcliffe and Wigan I use very pointedly because they're just two of the places that have recently been talking about regenerating their market halls to take market halls from being the sort of place where actually, you go and buy stacks of bog roll. You can do that at a pound shop now. So they have to find a new purpose. And I've seen loads of people. There was one recently in Wigan. There's a new mill been developed. We did a story about it on the business desk. And it's like, and the MEN's coverage of it was, they're going to do an Altrincham. Well, they're not.
I agree with you.
And Steve Pilling did the same in Stockport. He's done a marvellous job with New Century Hall in the centre of Manchester as well. A real hospitality entrepreneur in the north. It's one size doesn't fit all. You can't just apply that model and just people will come along, because they won't, because everywhere's different.
I think what Chorley have done quite well is they spent a lot of money on the Market Walk, which is their shopping centre. So they do cater for different tastes. It's not necessarily just a one hat fits all. But I do remember when I was the editor of the Chorley Guardian, I've mentioned this before, the biggest ever response we ever had to any promotion, and we had free cars, win a holiday, was when you could get a free Greg's pasty, and people would go into the newsagents and they would actually rip out the coupon. Maybe people just like me. I want to talk about something which is, we cover the north, and we deliberately don't want to cover Greater Manchester and the northwest. We want to try and go over to the northeast as well. We don't go as much as we do in this area, but we know this area a lot better. But there's a big announcement over Christmas and New Year, and it was in the northeast. The Guardian did a nice piece about this 1.4 billion devolution deal. Yeah, it wouldn't get much 1.4 million, not even in Marple, I wouldn't imagine. A 1.4 billion pound devolution deal in the northeast. The Guardian did a piece about the unlikely bond between the Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove and Jamie Driscoll, the Labour mayor for the north of Tyne region, and now a front runner to be the region's first mayor. Jamie Driscoll spoke, albeit remotely, pretty well, I thought, at the People's Powerhouse event that we both attended in Manchester recently, and his place before politics approach reminded me a little bit of Sir Richard Lee's. What did you think?
Well, maybe it's my own prejudice, given that Jamie Driscoll used to be the chair of Momentum in the northeast and a very, very high-profile supporter up there of Jeremy Corbyn. So maybe I need to discard my own prejudices, which immediately turn me against him. But I do probably need a little bit more convincing that he's more than just a lefty weather vane. But
I think in terms of the devolution deal and what I mentioned earlier about how the Conservative government under Rishi Sunak are trying the drip effect of just trying to drop Levelling Up in there, it's no surprise that the one minister who I wouldn't trust if you told me it was raining unless I checked, Michael Gove, but he is the one minister who gets stuff done. A very, very clever guy who gets stuff done. That's why I think he is in charge of Levelling Up. I've got a new game. The first game that I played, which was Name That Shadow Cabinet Minister, you got 5 out of 5 for. This next game, you'll love this actually, is called On Manoeuvres.
Well, I think it should be more than just a one-off game. I think we should refer to this every week. In the second section, we should always do Who's on Manoeuvres. Okay. It doesn't have to be a Tory MP either. It could be a Labour mayor, for example.
Well, let me explain to the listeners, because not everybody would understand the term on manoeuvres because they're not politicos like ourselves. So it's based on the fact that politicians or civil servants, whoever, are clearly on manoeuvres and they're doing things and saying things. There's clearly an underlying message and an underlying motive to what they're doing. So this first one, called On Manoeuvres, relates to a friend of the podcast, somebody that we refer to quite a lot, Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland MP MP, and the former Levelling Up Secretary, bracket, briefly, and Boris Johnson's cheerleader, Simon Clarke.
Yeah, so Katie Balls wrote this piece in the Times and spoke about it on the Spectator's Coffee House Shots podcast. So, you love a conspiracy theory.
Yep.
And Katie suggested that Trussonomics might be coming back. Oh, my God. Yeah. Really?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It was she's not saying Trussonomics are going to come back and Liz Truss is going to make a return, much the same way as Boris Johnson still is being linked with a return. But what she did is she had a Chinese meal in a restaurant with some of her loyalists. I can't believe there are many loyalists left, but one of them who was there was Simon Clarke. Now, that's prompted speculation that she might be and he might be on manoeuvres. She's been linked to setting up a think tank, which right. I can't wait for that. But the suggestion is that what they want to do is they're saying that, Liz Truss wasn't the greatest Prime Minister ever. Even though the Spectator headline at the weekend was what the PM can learn from Liz Truss. But what they're saying, and you sort of hinted at it, that she was consistent with what she wanted. She just didn't get her message across very well. It's all about this supply side economics. Now, Simon Clarke has launched a new project called Next Generation Conservatives, which I hope he didn't pay a lot of money for that branding, which is trying to engage with under 40s, because the statistics show that I think only 15% of under 40s are even willing to countenance the idea of voting for the Conservatives. So what Simon Clarke is doing is they're trying to engage with young Conservatives. So if you look at what he's doing, I mean, he was the one who prompted the U-turn by Rishi Sunak over the inshore wind farms. He's talking a lot about building for young people. Is Simon Clarke on manoeuvres?
Well, yeah, he's quite clearly on manoeuvres. But what the world doesn't need right now is yet another right-wing think tank promoting wild ideas about things that have been completely discredited. So tell me, come on, who else is on manoeuvres?
Okay, I've only got two on manoeuvres, otherwise we'd literally fill 5 hours. Okay, so this next one is a name not as well known as Simon Clarke. This is Blackpool South MP Scott Benton, who is increasingly has a view on anything, seemingly except if it's got to do with Blackpool South. Now, if you check out his Twitter feed, he says that Channel 4 is biased and should be sold off. He praises...
Hold on a minute. So this is what we were talking about in the last segment.
Yeah.
Channel 4 is biased, therefore it should be sold off.
Yeah, yeah.
Why does it stop being biased because it's owned by someone else?
Yeah, yeah.
Suddenly it just becomes...
but this is the problem.
A slave to the owners.
Yeah, but this is the problem that the Conservative Party have got. They've got this peripheral group of MPs, and I include Scott Benton in this. Incidentally, Scott, if you're listening, you want to come on the show and defend yourself, feel free.
What else does he talk about?
Absolutely. He also praises US presidential favourite, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, and shares a speech in which he said that Florida is the place where woke came to die. So a lot of people think he won on the back of his anti-wokeism. He's been tipped very much to be the next president as well. He says bookshops should stock Harry's book Spare in the fantasy section. He also shared a piece about the fact that Harry Kane has now got 198 goals for Tottenham. Now, just remember, if you've forgotten, easy to forget, Scott Benton is the Blackpool South MP. Now, it's worth saying that there's a guy called Harry Goodfellow1 tweeted in response to some of his tweets, Blackpool suffers from child poverty, rates are almost double that of the national average. Scott Benton has never discussed this on Twitter, but has found his time to give an opinion on Prince Harry's biography. Now, the point I'm making is that Scott Benton will literally say anything to attract attention. This was a tweet in relation to the striking rail workers. Those striking receive an average salary of £45,919 per year and have been offered a 9% increase over 2 years with a guarantee of no compulsory redundancies until April 2024. A bloody good salary, don't like swearing, but I'll let that one pass, and an increase above what most are getting. Hardly a bad deal, is it? So it seems to me that Mr. Benton's strategy to retain his seat at the next general election, he's not got a big majority, no surprise there, is to be seen as a crusader against all things woke, like his hero, Ron DeSantis. What do you think, Michael? And is Scott Benton on manoeuvres?
Yeah, completely is. And Benton, like Jonathan Gullis, Lee Anderson and Andrea Jenkins, they seem to represent what I would call the thick right of the Tory party. And they're pushing the buttons of the outright racist and culture war, anti-woke part of the population. At the same time, they're probably, I would guess, being tapped up by the Reform Party. That's a party that used to be called the Brexit Party, that was led by and set up by Nigel Farage. It's currently run by Richard Tice and his partner Isabel Oakeshott. Farage is probably operating somewhere in the shadows there as well, but they're keeping up a high profile in order to tempt some Tory MPs to jump ship and join them, to be a thorn in the side for the Tories, to campaign against things like immigration, nice people, things like that, and for a harder Brexit. God knows why. And that's why Rishi Sunak is trapped by them to an extent. So he keeps people like the awful Suella Braverman in as Home Secretary. And he's included putting in new laws to stop the small boat crossings as a key policy objective. This is about a battle for the long-term heart and soul of the Tory party. And that's why Scott Benton is on manoeuvres.
And as I say, if any of these people want to come on and defend themselves, like Lee Anderson, feel free, but expect us to ask the sort of questions that we don't think you're being asked at the moment. Because, if you only get attention by saying nasty things, then it's just a race to the bottom.
So if Scott Benton came on, you could ask him a perfectly legitimate question, such as...
What formation should Tottenham play?
No. What formation should Blackpool play?
Yeah. Right, I think it's time for a quick break.
Or when the last time Blackpool won anything?
No, you can't say that because they beat Nottingham Forest at the weekend 4-1 in the FA Cup.
Which is better than my team did in a cup match against Nottingham Forest recently.
Okay.
Welcome back to the third and final part of Northern Spin. This is the bit where we look at the lighter side of the North, our ongoing attempts to make Chris a little bit more northern. Or maybe you'll accuse me of being a little bit chippy and mank. Or...
My wife got me a cup and she wanted me to share it with you.
Okay.
As a...
Go on, let's have a look. I'll read it out.
Yeah, as a Blackburn fan, you're not used to cups.
Accent. I'm not perfect, but I'm northern, and that's pretty much the same thing. That's brilliant. I love that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good. You have to have a cup of Lancashire tea in that.
I'm going to put that on the. I'm going to put that over there so I can refer to it every week.
Very good. Right. So anyway, I want to start talking about Andy Spinoza's book, Manchester Unspun, which is coming out in February. I had the rare honour of running the rule over this fantastic book due out in February. He's crafted what I would describe as a memoir history of Manchester over the last 4 decades, obviously from his own perspective. And it just tells an absolutely terrific tale of a city undergoing incredible change. So when the time's right, we'll post a fuller review, maybe interview Andy for this podcast.
Yeah.
Would that be legitimate?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
But as you can tell, I obviously enjoyed it immensely. I think every book's got a core audience, then a core audience, and then an inner core audience. And I think I'm that, because I'm a proper anorak, because it's got music, politics, all the stuff I wrote about. I'm in the Index twice. Yeah. Did I mention that? And also that Andy's a journalist, so he tells a great tale. He talks us through his work with Mick Hucknall from Simply Red, who's a major property investor in Manchester, which not a lot of people know. He also worked for Gary Neville, and it didn't necessarily end that well for Andy. But he just tells it in such an honest, authentic, and really, really compelling way. And you can understand why the reviews that he's had so far from people who've been lucky enough to have sight of it have been so fulsome.
I went to Lytham Festival last year, and Mick Hucknall performed with Simply Red. I'm not a Simply Red fan, but he was brilliant actually. Now the book's not out until.
Why are you not? Why would he say I'm not a Simply Red fan, but he was brilliant?
Yeah, well, because I'm not. I mean, if you look at my history on Spotify, you won't find any Mick Hucknall on there. But he was just a real
Jim
charismatic.
Davison, Roy Chubby Brown.
Yeah, no, neither of those are on there either.
The Lancashire Hot Pots.
No, but I tell you what, actually, what's interesting is my daughter Imogen. She was looking at my musical collection, and she literally despaired. And she doesn't
Celine
hold back.
Dion.
She doesn't hold. She is on there.
Ed Sheeran is as well.
He's on there as well.
Adele.
But what she said, she's on there. Look, you've obviously looked into my Spotify.
I genuinely haven't.
But what she said was that if you listen to
it's
something,
music for people who don't like music.
If you listen to something and then press Spotify
radio,
then what it does, the algorithms pick all the music that you like. It is amazing. It's changed my life.
Yeah, it's good.
I like Andy Spinoza a lot. Now, I knew him best, of course, when he was the MD of SKV Communications. He had his finger in most pies in Manchester, much the same as you. Like me, he's an adopted Northerner. He's been here a lot longer than me. I think he came up here at the age of 18 and he's never left. What I think is quite appropriate, because when we were talking about a name for this podcast, the name that you liked was Northern Unspun, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And in the end, we settled on Northern Spin.
I'm glad Andy liked it for his book anyway.
Absolutely. It's very apt that we're talking about Andy Spinoza, nickname Spin. We're talking about Spin on Northern Spin.
So after we recorded our last show of the year, I literally stumbled across a fantastic bookshop at the top of King Street, just up the road from the studio. It's called the House of Books and Friends, and it's a community interest company started by Darryl Cook from the law firm Gunnar Cook. And he's created this wonderful space in partnership with the landlord, Bruntwood, in order to promote great books. So you can have a coffee and a cake there as well. And it's also a place that he really wants to combat loneliness. So I've been back since. One was to have a meeting with Andy Spinoza about my comments on the printer's draft of his book before publication. But it was also to buy some books for Christmas presents. So I want to talk about this thought that I've had. So the staff were wonderful. And I said to them a couple of authors that my wife liked, like Lucy Foley and Elizabeth Day. And they said, here's something for you. How to Kill Your Family by Bella Mackie. Now, I then read it afterwards, after Rachel had read it, and said, you will love this. And sure enough, I did. I really, really enjoyed it and liked it. But then I went and spoiled it all by doing something stupid like looking up the author. And tell me if this is really bad, because we've talked about this throughout the podcast, about people's backgrounds. Bella Mackie, the author, her husband, is the Radio 1 presenter and TV star Greg James. Her dad is the former editor of The Guardian, Alan Rushbridger. And the thanks at the start of the book include people who she names as friends, like her former Guardian colleague, Janine Gibson. And then she thanks her agent, her editor. I'm thinking, you've had every start in life to be able to get a book deal. Loads of people write books all the time. People who live in Tameside, Stockport, Chorley will be writing books, and they haven't got the network that will enable them to get even close to being able to get a book. Now, it's really, really well written. I'm not going to take a smidgen away from the obvious talent that she's got, but the network that she's had to enable it. I don't know. So all I'm asking you, and not to as an opportunity to have a go at me.
Yeah.
I just had a sinking feeling when I read that. Is that bad of me?
Yeah, I tell you what I think is interesting is that, look, if I didn't know her and I hadn't listened to some of her podcasts, which she does with Greg James, I would form exactly the same opinion as you. She is at every opportunity in life, every opportunity, but actually what she produces is really good, and she comes across really, really well as well. You mentioned bookshops. My daughter, my eldest daughter, she works in a bookshop. She has for 3 years as well.
Right, which one?
What's
Give it a plug.
Waterstones. I won't say where, because it wouldn't be fair for millions of people to turn up and chastise her because of her dad. But what's interesting is a number of people who come in for conversations.
Yeah.
So, I'm one of these people who I buy stuff on Amazon, and I listen to everything on Audible, but people come in and literally they haven't spoken to anybody for days. And my daughter has got a real reputation that if people ask her questions, she'll talk and they'll comment. It's really nice. I think the phrase we've spoken about a lot is that talent is evenly spread, but opportunity isn't.
Yeah.
And 65% of Rishi Sunak's government went to private school, and I'm a massive, massive cricket fan. And I'm a massive fan of Ben Stokes as well. But a lot of the England Test cricketers have gone to private school. Yeah. So there's an issue there. It's not their fault. But we have to move away from the fact that talent is evenly spread, but opportunity isn't. It's for us and for people like us, Michael, and I'm being serious now, to keep banging the drum to make sure that there is opportunity for everyone. Yeah,
there is. I mean, I was in the position to do so when I was an editor, and I hired loads of people, gave job opportunities to people, and I wouldn't say I went out of my way. No, I did. I actively went out of my way to give opportunities to people who were from the sort of backgrounds where they wouldn't necessarily think that they could ever have a career in business journalism. And I spoke to students at universities like UCLan, for example, and said, you can do this, you can step up. And many of those young people did, and they thank me to this day.
Yeah, no, and I've always given opportunity to people. I've taken people in and given them work experience opportunities, but I've always been hard. I've always been really hard on them because I've said life isn't easy, So I'm not going to give you a really easy experience.
Yeah.
You know, one of the people I had on work experience, Henry Hill, who's now at a Conservative home. But a lot of people will be saying Henry who, but he's a nice guy, and he pit in the hard yards and did work experience for me. And I didn't give him an easy ride.
There was an article produced before Christmas in the New York Times or the New Yorker about Nepo babies, which is the sons and daughters of Hollywood stars. And sure enough, I watched Glass Onion over Christmas on Netflix, starring.
Did you like it?
Kate Hudson. Yeah. Thought it was great.
Did you pick the end early? My brother picked it in 30 minutes.
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't. Don't ruin it for anyone.
Okay. No, I won't.
Good.
No.
Anyway, let's talk about your ongoing attempts to become a little bit more northern with your cultural escapades. What you watched Sherwood, which I recommended, with David Morrissey and Robert Glenister. What did you think?
Yeah, it can make a point, actually, that the sons and daughters of famous people, I would actually argue, almost have it harder. So Romeo Beckham has been signed by Brentford B team, and yes, he's going to get attention, but everyone knows he is David Beckham's son.
Yeah.
So there is a counterbalance there. But in terms of
But is he any good at football?
In terms of Sherwood, yeah.
If we can talk about one person, it would be Frank Lampard. Now, he got a lot of West Ham fans when he broke into the team said he was no good, and Harry Redknapp said, "You watch this is one of the greats."
Yeah.
And sure enough, and he proved anybody who doubted his talent wrong. I actually saw Frank Lampard playing for Swansea in a get when he was on loan from West Ham when he was being blooded.
But when you talk about David Beckham, I've got a lot of friends who are Preston fans, and they say that
when he did that for North End, didn't he?
When he came to Preston, his attitude was spot on. And another player whose attitude was spot on was Reece James, who went to Wigan. I've got a lot of friends who are Wigan fans as well. And
But they're not sons and daughters of famous people. That's my point about Lampard. Is you said, he had to work really, really hard. Now Romeo Beckham.
Okay.
Now who was he playing for? Which professional football club had he, of Brentford B team, signed him from? Where he earned his big break? It's Inter Miami, which is owned by his dad
and managed by his uncle. But you stop being cynical. Look, we're so early into the new year, Michael, and you're being cynical. But let's get back to the question you asked, which is
yes,
Sherwood.
I did. Let's repeat the question. So, Chris, let's talk about your ongoing attempts to become more northern. You watched, on my recommendation, the BBC drama Sherwood with David Morrissey and Robert Glenister, set in the aftermath of the miners' strike of 1985 and the appalling effects that it had on a community in North Nottinghamshire.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any thoughts?
Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. It was. The thing is, the murders were almost incidental. So the writer basically said that he grew up and there were a couple of murders. So the murders in this aren't those murders, but they were sort of inspired the writing. So there were two murders in this very closely knit Nottinghamshire mining village, and even though it was years and years after the event, the market, the town was still split by the issues over what went on in the miners' strike. Just remember, for the listeners who don't know, that during the miners' strike in 1984-85, my dad was a miner. He was in Kent. In Nottinghamshire, there was a split union, wasn't there? There was a splinter union set up.
It was the Union of Democratic Mine Workers, and they went back to work almost straight away. They didn't take part in the strike, and the Nottinghamshire Coalfield had their own ballot to say not to go on strike.
Very, very moving.
And the communities were stricken to this day.
Very, very moving.
But you liked it. Is the point.
And a mutual friend of ours, Andrea Wolfendale, cried at the end, but she cries at anything. So I'm not sure that's a ringing testimony.
Great. So Happy Valley's returned to our screens after a gap of 7 years. Yeah. Now that's set in Calderdale, isn't it? Around sort of Halifax, Todmorden, Hebden Bridge, places like that. Starring Sarah Lancashire. Yeah. I've watched one episode. I didn't watch the one that was on Sunday night. We're gonna.
Yeah, we got
to bed early. Yeah. So don't ruin it for me.
I've not seen it myself.
Okay. But anyway, what's your verdict? So far, so good?
Yeah. It is just brilliant. It's beyond brilliant. I mean, the one thing I would say about Happy Valley is don't expect it to be happy, but it is set in a valley. Sarah Lancashire is just an amazing actress. She doesn't do loads and loads of stuff, but I don't know if you're a fan of Coronation Street, it's easy to forget that she played Raquel, Curly Watts' girlfriend, back in the early 1990s. Steve Oliver, Music Magpie, massive fan of Coronation Street. He'll know this. She's married to ex-BBC executive Peter Salmon, actually. It's just breathtaking writing. Breathtaking actors. It's as good as it gets. If you've not watched it and you've not watched the first two series, I envy you. My only bugbear is this. I watched the first episode and then I went to press the second episode, and it wasn't on.
Yeah.
I had to wait. I mean, what's happening? I
Our
want it on
viewing
demand.
habits have changed, haven't they?
Yeah.
We were going to wait for the whole thing, but we ended up watching it.
You went to watch the mighty Stockport yesterday?
I did. I went to watch Stockport County against Walsall with my mate Joshy Herman, editor of the Manchester Mill, who wants to come on this podcast, by the way.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Yeah, we'll go on his as well.
Yeah.
Then everyone will, one day everyone will have a podcast and be guests on each other's.
Yeah.
We went to that. Bumped into a few Labour people in and around Stockport. Who
Not
were at the
surprised.
match. Yeah.
Not surprised you bumping into Labour people.
And loads of media people. So Richard Stead from the BBC, he was there. Yeah. Saw a bit of aggro after the match as well. It was a bit of a throwback to the 1980s.
Between who?
Stockport and Walsall fans having a bit of a tear up in the street with lots of police running around and innocent members of the public being caught up in the aggro.
Yeah.
I
wouldn't want to overplay that. I wouldn't want to overplay that because Stockport have done an amazing role. But yeah, you don't tend to see those headlines, which is the reason why when you see it, it's a surprise. But they got beat, didn't they?
Stockport got beat 2-1 with a penalty in the 94th minute, which...
I would have left by then, of course.
Yes. You'd have missed that, wouldn't you? But I love the FA Cup.
Yeah.
I really love the FA Cup. The idea that someone like a non-league team like Wrexham can beat Coventry, that Blackpool can beat Nottingham Forest from the Premier League, that League One Sheffield Wednesday will beat Premiership, big spending Newcastle United, and there was another game as well where a lower league team won, not Bournemouth out, but I can't remember who that was.
I don't want to sound instantly. I don't want to sound like you, cynical Michael from Marple.
But it's drama.
You talk
That's
about
not
Wrexham.
cynical.
You talk
That's
about
romance.
Wrexham. Talk about Wrexham. Oh, little old non-league Wrexham, who've got 2 Hollywood actors as their owners. They are as close to being non-league. I know they are technically, and I know they're still second in the league.
No, Chris, they are.
It was a great game though, because they were 4-1 up, and Coventry had a player sent off, and they got back to 4-3. Coventry. That was a great game.
Coventry play 3 divisions above them.
I thought
Stevenage beat Aston Villa. Yeah. That was amazing.
That was amazing. Even though I thought Olsen was at fault for the winning goal, the goalkeeper for Aston Villa. Never get beaten on your near post. But
don't matter.
Yeah. I thought there was a bit of a throwback this weekend actually, because teams pitting sort of Premier League teams in the main pitting actually decent teams. They put decent teams out. And I thought that was good. I thought Newcastle getting beat by Sheffield Wednesday. Dean Windas's son, scored 2 goals, even though the first one was clearly offside. No, it was just great. And it was good fun. And actually, it just made for a great weekend of football.
It certainly did. Right, that's all we've got time for the 6th episode of Season 2 of Northern Spin. We're now on Apple Podcasts. We've been on for a while. We're on all sorts of platforms, actually. Seek us out wherever you may find us. And don't forget to press the subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at northern_spin1. You can watch us on YouTube. Thank you to What Media for recording this podcast, to Oscar Technology for sponsoring us, and to Elliot Taylor for providing the music. My name is Michael Taylor,
the chap from Stockport, and my name is Chris Maguire, the poor chap from Chorley. Thank you very much.